My name is Abigail. And at 36, I found myself standing in the entryway of my childhood church, surrounded by soft organ music and the scent of lilies, preparing for one of the hardest days of my life. My mother's funeral. The air was thick with grief, memories, and something else. Anticipation. Because I knew who would walk through that door, and I knew she had no idea what was waiting for her. 6 years had passed since I last saw my younger sister, Stephanie. 6 years since she looked me in the eye and smiled. Knowing she had just destroyed my life. She didn't have to say it out loud. I saw it in her smirk. The diamond ring that once belonged to me now sparkled on her finger. Nathan, the man I had loved, trusted, and planned to marry, stood beside her, arm around her waist, pretending none of it had ever mattered, pretending I didn't exist. I hadn't seen either of them since the day I caught them together, not in photos, not in passing, not even at family gatherings. I made sure of that. But today, for the sake of our mother, I had no choice, and neither did they. As I stood in the front row beside my father, I heard the soft stir of whispers rise behind me. I didn't have to turn around. I knew they had arrived. My grip tightened around the folded program in my hand as I watched my father's shoulders tense beside me. He still hadn't forgiven her either. Not fully. How could he? I turned slowly. Not to greet them, but to face them. Stephanie looked just as polished as ever, wearing an elegant black dress tailored to perfection, her makeup flawless. The diamond ring gleamed like a spotlight on her left hand. Nathan followed closely, looking slightly less composed, his smile more practiced than genuine. They made their way through the crowd, pausing to shake hands, exchange pleasantries, and receive condolences. From the outside, they looked like a power couple, charming, connected, well-dressed. But I knew better. What they didn't know, what Stephanie didn't know, was that I was no longer the same woman she had betrayed. She hadn't met my husband yet. As they approached, I felt a quiet shift in the room. Not dramatic, not loud, just enough for people to glance between us, sensing something unspoken. Stephanie stepped forward first, offering a stiff hug to our father. He accepted it, barely, then turned away. Nathan extended a hand to me. I ignored it. Stephanie's eyes flicked toward mine, waiting for some kind of reaction, some crack in my armor. She wouldn't get one. She opened her mouth to say something, but I stopped her with a calm smile. Have you met my husband? Her expression froze for a beat too long. I turned slightly, and there he was. Zachary. Tall, composed, effortlessly refined in a dark tailored suit. He stepped forward with quiet confidence, placing a gentle hand on the small of my back. Stephanie's gaze shifted from me to him, then back again. Her posture faltered. Nathan's eyes widened ever so slightly, and in that instant, I saw it. Recognition, fear, regret. It rippled across Nathan's face like a wave he didn't see coming. Zachary extended his hand to Nathan with polite ease. I watched Nathan hesitate before accepting the handshake, his movements suddenly unsure. The moment passed quickly. No one else in the room understood the significance. But I did. Stefania did. Nathan certainly did. It was subtle, elegant, devastating. Because the best revenge doesn't require chaos or confrontation. Sometimes, all it takes is showing up calm, composed, and walking in with the kind of life they thought they had taken from you, and knowing, deep down, they can never touch it again. 6 years earlier, my life looked exactly how I had imagined it would. I was 30, living in a high-rise apartment in downtown Boston, rising quickly through the ranks as a marketing executive at a major tech consulting firm. I worked hard, traveled often, and felt like I was finally stepping into the kind of life my mother had always believed I deserved. Then I met Nathan. He was magnetic. The kind of man who could walk into any room and command it without raising his voice. We were introduced at a charity gala by a college friend. And within minutes, I felt like the rest of the room had faded away. He was confident, articulate, and disarmingly attentive. A self-made millionaire in his mid-30s with a growing tech empire and a story built for glossy magazine covers. Our connection was immediate. We bonded over travel, classical music, and shared ambition. Within weeks, he was sending flowers to my office, planning weekend getaways to Martha's Vineyard, and making my life feel like a dream. 18 months later, he proposed on a yacht in Boston Harbor with a 5-carat diamond ring that sparkled like a promise. I said yes without hesitation. My mother cried when I told her. Happy tears. She loved Nathan from the start. His charm. His polish. The way he seemed to adore me. It felt like everything was falling into place. Stefania, my younger sister by 2 years, was surprisingly supportive when she heard the news. We hadn't always been close. Growing up, we had the kind of relationship that danced between sibling affection and constant rivalry. If I got an A, she needed an A+. If I got into a good college, she had to land the better internship. It was subtle, but persistent. Still, I chose her as my maid of honor. It felt like the right thing to do. We were adults now. Maybe this would bring us closer. The first time she met Nathan was at a family dinner. She wore a silk dress and lipstick that was a little too bright for the occasion. She laughed a bit too hard at his jokes. Touched his arm a little too often. I noticed, but I told myself not to be paranoid. Stephanie was naturally flirtatious. It didn't mean anything. As wedding planning began, Stephanie volunteered to help with everything. Venue tour, tastings, floral consultations. She called often, offering to step in when I was tied up at work. She said she just wanted everything to be perfect for her big sister. I wanted to believe her. But the signs began to pile up. Nathan started acting distant. He was suddenly working late, missing dinners, constantly glued to his phone. He no longer complimented my outfits or asked about my day. Small criticisms crept into our conversations. My laugh was too loud. My dress too plain. My reading light too bright at night. Things he used to love about me now seemed to irritate him. And then came the earring. I was cleaning out the passenger side of his car before a dinner party when I saw it. Tucked between the seat and center console. A silver drop earring with a tiny sapphire. I recognized it immediately. It was Stephanie's Planck's pension. A gift from our grandmother. She had worn them to our engagement party. When I showed it to Nathan, he didn't even blink. She lost that when I gave her a ride to the florist last week, he said. Too smoothly. She mentioned it. Remember, no. I didn't remember. Because he never told me. I called Stephanie that night. She gave me the exact same story. Word for word. I hung up the phone, staring into the quiet of my apartment. Every cell in my body screaming what I didn't want to accept. It wasn't just my fiancé I was losing. It was my sister. The betrayal hadn't come from some stranger or coworker or fleeting mistake. It had come from the person who once shared my crib, my secrets, and my childhood. And that kind of betrayal doesn't just break your heart. It rewrites your entire definition of trust. It happened on a Wednesday. A gray, ordinary kind of day that gave no warning for what was about to collapse. I had taken the morning off work to bring Nathan lunch. Something small. Something thoughtful. His favorite sandwich from the deli across from my office. A gesture to remind him that despite the tension, I still cared. That I was still trying. I called ahead. But he didn't answer. So I went anyway. The security guard in the lobby of his building knew me. He smiled and waved me through without question. I stepped into the elevator, clutching the lunch bag. smoothing my blouse, rehearsing some light, breezy comment in my head. Anything to chip away at the distance that had been growing between us. When I reached the 12th floor, the receptionist looked up with a flicker of surprise. Her name was Margot. We'd met a few times. Rebecca. She started. Then caught herself. Abigail. We weren't expecting you. She glanced at the door behind her. The one that led to Nathan's office. Then back at me. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. He's in a meeting, she said quickly. That's all right, I replied, holding up the lunch bag. I'll just leave this inside. She stood abruptly, stepping in front of me. Actually, he asked, not to be disturbed. The words hung between us, thick with tension, something in her voice, in the way she avoided my gaze, made the air shift. Is he alone in there? I asked, my voice low, almost too calm. Margot opened her mouth but didn't speak. That was enough. I moved past her. I opened the office door, and that was the moment everything ended. Nathan stood with his back to me, leaning against his desk. Stephanie was in his arms, her hands around his neck, their mouths locked in a kiss so familiar, so practiced. It was clear this wasn't new. Her skirt was slightly rumpled, his tie undone. They didn't notice me right away, but I saw everything, every angle, every detail, every moment that confirmed every gut feeling I had ignored for months. When the door clicked shut behind me, they broke apart. Stephanie's face went pale. Nathan straightened his tie, already switching into damage control mode. Abigail, he said quickly, voice measured. This isn't what it looks like. Stephanie didn't even bother with a denial. Her chin lifted. We didn't plan this, she said flatly. It just happened. I stood perfectly still. My heart was racing, but my voice was steady. How long? Nathan looked at her, then at me. Let's talk privately. How long? I repeated. Stephanie answered. Since the engagement party. I nodded slowly, letting it sink in. All those nights he worked late. All the calls. The perfume. The sudden disinterest. It hadn't been stress. It hadn't been cold feet. It had been her. Nathan stepped behind his desk like he was preparing for a business negotiation. We didn't mean for this to happen, he said. Sometimes feelings change. I looked at both of them. You lied to me, I said quietly. Over and over. While I was planning a wedding. You were building a betrayal. Nathan reached for the intercom. Margot. Could you come in? I stared at him. She's upset, he said to the room, as if I weren't even standing there. Margot entered. Eyes lowered. He nodded toward me. Please escort Abigail out. I didn't move. Then I smiled. No need, I said. I can escort myself. And I did. I walked past them both. Past Margot. Down the hallway. Into the elevator. And out of the building. I didn't cry until I got to my car. And when I did, it wasn't just for Nathan, or even for Stephanie. It was for the girl I used to be before that door opened. The girl who still believed love meant something sacred. The girl who still believed family did too. The weeks after it all came crashing down, moved in slow motion. I barely remember the drive home from Nathan's office. Only that I somehow ended up curled on the bathroom floor of my apartment, still holding the lunch bag that never made it to his desk. My parents let themselves in after I called my mother and couldn't get the words out. She held me while I sobbed. My father paced the living room, repeating that he'd never forgive them. I believed him. The days that followed were a blur of phone calls, returned deposits, and canceled vendors. I couldn't bear to handle the logistics. So my mother helped. My father returned the ring to Nathan's building. Stephanie had already moved in, Her clothes filled the closet that once held mine. Photos of them lined the shelves where I used to keep family pictures. I thought the pain would kill me. It didn't. But it hollowed me out. I tried to go back to work. He sat at me desk, stared at the screen, and tried to pretend like nothing had changed. But everything had. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. I started crying in elevators and parking garages and meetings with clients who used to find me confident and sharp. After I broke down during a major presentation, my boss asked if I needed time off. I nodded without hesitation. 2 days later, I met with a therapist. She didn't say anything profound at first, just listened. Let the silence stretch. Eventually, I filled it. With stories, with shame, with a version of grief I didn't know how to carry. And then one day, she asked a question that landed like lightning in my chest. What would it look like to leave Boston behind? It hadn't occurred to me. Up until then, I had clung to the familiar. My apartment, my office, the city streets that now whispered reminders of everything I'd lost. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Boston had become a graveyard. I needed to find somewhere new to grow. When a position opened in my firm's Chicago branch, a senior role with a clean slate, I applied. I was honest in the interview. I said I was looking for a fresh start. 2 weeks later, they offered me the job. Packing up my life was harder than I expected. Every object seemed to carry a memory. Every photo frame, every dish towel, every coat still hanging in the entry closet. My mother helped me sort through it. At one point, she asked if I'd ever consider forgiving Stephanie. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to lie. And I wasn't ready to tell the truth either. I arrived in Chicago in the middle of January. The city felt big and strange and cold in a way that matched something inside me. I moved into a small studio near the river. The walls were bare. The silence was unfamiliar. I worked long hours, mostly to avoid going home to the emptiness. But slowly, things began to shift. My therapist recommended someone local. I started weekly sessions again. I joined a book club through a coworker. I met Madison, the firm's HR director, who became my first real friend in the city. She introduced me to her circle. They didn't know my past. They didn't look at me with pity. That alone felt like freedom. I didn't feel whole yet. Not even close. But for the first time in months, I wasn't unraveling. And I realized something important. Healing doesn't always look like joy. Sometimes it just looks like making your bed, showing up to work, saying yes to a dinner invite, and brushing your hair even when you don't feel like it. It's not glamorous. It's not immediate, but it's movement. And for me, in that season, movement was enough. I met Zachary on a business trip to San Francisco. About 4 months after moving to Chicago, I had been sent to represent our firm at a tech conference. Something I would have once looked forward to, but now approached with quiet caution. I wasn't the same woman who used to command boardrooms with ease. I was still piecing myself back together. The second evening of the conference, there was a client dinner. I ended up seated beside a man in a navy suit, soft-spoken with kind eyes and a calm that felt strangely grounding. His name was Zachary Foster. He asked thoughtful questions and listened like he actually wanted to hear the answers. There was nothing flashy about him. No overcompensation. No charming distractions. Just presence. We talked about marketing trends, the future of digital storytelling, and our favorite cities for business travel. I gave him my card at the end of the evening, expecting nothing more than a follow-up email. He emailed the next morning. Not to pitch. Not to flirt. Just to ask if I wanted to continue our conversation over coffee before the next session started. I said yes, over the next few months. We kept in touch. He referred a few clients to my firm. I connected him with contacts in the Midwest. We saw each other at industry events. Madison noticed. She teased me, saying colleagues don't look at each other the way he looked at me. I denied it. Of course. Not because I didn't feel something, but because the idea of opening that door again terrified me. Eventually, Zachary asked me to dinner. Not work-related. Just dinner. I almost canceled twice. The night we finally went out, I made it 20 minutes before a full-blown panic attack hit me in the middle of the appetizer. My hands shook. My breath caught. Tears welled in my eyes. Zachary didn't ask questions. He didn't panic or withdraw. He moved to sit beside me, not across from me, and spoke gently until I could breathe again. Then he paid the check, drove me home, and told me to let him know if I ever felt ready to talk. The next day, a bouquet arrived at my office. White tulips. No card except a handwritten note. No pressure. No expectations. Just hoping you're okay. That night, I called him, and I told him everything. About Nathan. About Stephanie. About the collapse of my life in Boston. About the shame I still carried and the doubt that followed me like a shadow. He listened without interrupting. Then, when I was finished, he told me about his own divorce. About how his wife left him for his business partner and took half their company in the process. Broken trust doesn't mean you're broken, he said quietly. It just means you've been forced to see the truth before you were ready. We started slowly after that. Intentional. Gentle. He never pushed. Never rushed. When I pulled away, he stayed nearby. When I panicked, he grounded me. He never once tried to fix me. He just made room for me to heal. Our 5th date was dinner at his place. Something low-key. No pressure. He cooked. I brought wine. We watched a movie neither of us finished. I fell asleep on his couch. He covered me with a blanket and sat beside me until morning. I didn't fall in love with Zachary all at once. It wasn't a spark. It was a steady flame. Quiet. Sure. Unshakable. For the first time since everything fell apart, I began to believe that trust could grow back. Not because someone said the right things, but because they stayed when you didn't have to say anything at all. The morning of my mother's funeral was overcast. A soft gray light settling over the family home like a veil. I stood in front of the mirror in my childhood bedroom, smoothing the black dress I had worn only once before. My father sat silently downstairs, nursing a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. We were both moving through the day as if on rails, each of us carrying our own weight of loss, of memory, of expectation. Zachary stood behind me, adjusting his tie. He placed one hand gently on my shoulder and met my eyes in the mirror. "I'm right beside you today," he said, voice low and steady. "No matter what happens." I nodded. When we arrived at the funeral home, the room was already filling with extended family. Neighbors. Old friends. My father and I sat in the front row, Zachary just beside me. A quiet anchor in the storm. And then I felt it. The subtle shift in the air, the hush that fell across the room like a ripple of discomfort. They had arrived. Stephanie entered in a sleek black dress and heels too tall for the occasion. Her makeup was flawless. Her diamond earrings caught the light, and on her left hand, resting just visibly against her handbag, was the ring, the one that once belonged to me. Nathan followed closely, looking slightly out of place despite the tailored suit. He offered polite nods to people as they passed, but his eyes kept flicking around the room, scanning. For me, they made their way to the front, pausing, as expected, to offer condolences. My father gave Stephanie a brief hug, more out of formality than feeling. His handshake with Nathan was even colder. Then Stephanie turned to me. "It's been a long time," she said softly, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yes," I replied. My tone even. Nathan nodded. Sorry for your loss. Zachary had stepped away to speak with the funeral director. Stephanie leaned in slightly. Her voice low. I wanted to talk to you. Privately. I didn't want a scene. Not today. Not here. So I followed her to a quiet side room. She closed the door behind us and took a slow breath. Up close. I could see the cracks. Fine lines around her eyes. A tightness in her posture that didn't match the image she was projecting. We bought a house on the Cape last month, she said. Almost casually. 8 bedrooms. Private beach access. Nathan's company just acquired 2 startups. We're planning a nursery. I didn't respond. She smiled a little tighter. Poor you, she added, tilting her head. Still alone at 36. I let the silence stretch, then smiled back, calm and unbothered. Have you met my husband? Her expression flickered. Confusion. Then curiosity. The door opened, and Zachary stepped in, tall and composed. Stephanie straightened instinctively, but her face fell the moment Nathan appeared behind him. The change was instant. Nathan's jaw tensed. His color drained. Foster, he said under his breath, as though the name itself knocked the air out of him. Zachary's tone remained smooth but cool. Reynolds. Their handshake was brief, controlled. You two know each other? Stephanie asked, clearly sensing the tension. Zachary didn't look at her. He looked at Nathan. It's been 7 years since Inotech chose us over your firm. That was a rough acquisition. Nathan said nothing. His throat bobbed once. His hands clenched. We're married, I said, my voice quiet but clear. 2 years now. Stephanie's smile didn't return. She looked at me, then back at Zachary. And for the first time in years, I saw something new in her expression. Doubt? Nathan stepped back slightly, eyes still on Zachary. If you'd like to reconnect, Zachary added politely, you can contact my office. He turned toward me, offering his arm, and just like that, the balance shifted. No shouting, no accusations. Just a simple truth. I had built a life so steady, so full, so solid, that theirs didn't rattle me anymore. They didn't know how to answer that kind of peace. And that was the most satisfying silence I had ever heard. The day after the funeral, Zachary flew back to Chicago for a board meeting. I stayed behind to help my father sort through the house. The closets. The endless drawers of memories my mother left behind. The rain had stopped. But everything still felt heavy, as if grief had settled into the walls. That afternoon, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the front window, I saw Stephanie standing alone on the porch. No sign of Nathan's car. Her coat hung loose on her frame, and her eyes looked tired in a way makeup couldn't fix. Can I come in? She asked quietly. I let her. We sat in the kitchen. 2 mugs of untouched coffee between us. She stared down at hers for a long time before speaking. I wanted to apologize, she said, for what I said yesterday. About the house. The money. The nursery. It was cruel and unnecessary. I didn't respond. I waited. She took a deep breath. Dad showed me Mom's journal last night. The last entry was about us. About how she wished we'd find our way back to each other. I nodded. I found it too. She looked up then, and for the first time in years, her face didn't hold smugness or superiority. It held defeat. You want honesty? She asked. Here it is. I've been miserable since the beginning. The words hung in the air, soft but sharp. I thought I won, she continued. I thought I got the better life. But the truth is, Nathan isn't the man I thought he was. Maybe he never was. She talked, and I listened. About how he tracked her spending, about the passive-aggressive remarks, about how each new acquisition was a desperate move to stay afloat, not a triumph. Their vacations were borrowed on credit, their home mortgaged twice over. Their public life was a performance. One she was exhausted from maintaining. He reads my texts. She whispered. He checks my location. He questions everything I do. I don't make decisions anymore. I ask for permission. I didn't feel satisfaction. Ifat. Clarity. The life she stole wasn't a treasure. It was a mask. And now it was cracking. I've been seeing a lawyer, she said finally, quietly. I haven't told him yet, but I'm planning to leave. As soon as it's safe. I pushed the journal across the table toward her. You should read the rest, I said. She wrote about you, too. She flipped through the pages, her hand trembling. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said. I wouldn't, if I were you, but I needed you to know the truth. Before I blow up my life again, her voice broke then. And for the first time since we were kids, I saw the little girl in her again. The one who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms. The one who used to braid my hair and beg me to let her wear my clothes. We sat in silence. The only sound the ticking of the kitchen clock. I don't hate you, I said finally. But I don't know if I can trust you. Not yet. I understand, she whispered. But I'm trying. We spent the rest of the afternoon going through Mom's things. Holding up dresses. Sharing stories. Laughing softly over memories that belonged to both of us. Even now, we weren't sisters again. Not yet. But we weren't strangers either. And that, for the first time in a long time, felt like a beginning. 6 months after the funeral, I found myself standing in the middle of our nursery, one hand resting gently on my growing belly, while Zachary painted the walls a soft, calming green. We had waited years for this moment, held our breath through losses and disappointments, whispered silent prayers in sterile doctors' offices, and promised each other we wouldn't give up. And now, somehow, here it was. A new chapter. A new life. Quiet. Steady joy. Chicago had become more than a fresh start. It had become home. Our brownstone buzzed with laughter. With music drifting from the kitchen. With weekend projects and late-night conversations that stretched well past midnight. My work had flourished. I was now vice president of strategy at the firm. Zachary's business had grown into something even more meaningful. Investing in women-led startups and mentoring young entrepreneurs. We never competed. We collaborated. We respected each other's ambitions, supported each other's scars, and celebrated each other's wins, big and small. And that, more than anything, made me realize how far I had come. Stephanie called once every few weeks. Nothing heavy, just small updates. She had moved into a modest apartment in Cambridge and taken a position at a mid-sized marketing agency. She sounded different, softer, still herself. Bit less performative. She no longer spoke in curated statements or carefully rehearsed pride. She sounded real. We weren't close. Not yet, but we were cautious, honest, and slowly rebuilding a kind of tentative sisterhood. No illusions. No pretending the past hadn't happened, but also no desire to keep living in it. Sometimes healing isn't about going back to what was. Sometimes it's about creating something entirely new, on better terms, with clearer boundaries, and deeper understanding. I didn't need revenge anymore. I didn't crave vindication. I didn't replay the old scenes in my mind late at night or imagine what I would say if I could go back. Because I no longer needed them to feel sorry. I had outgrown the pain. And with that growth came peace. Stephanie's life no longer stirred anything in me. Not envy. Not resentment. Not even satisfaction. She was walking her own path now. And I hoped, in my heart, that it would finally be one she could live with. As for Nathan, I hadn't heard his name in months. His company had folded quietly after another failed acquisition. A few mutual acquaintances mentioned he had moved out of state. I didn't care enough to ask where. Whatever story he was living now, it was no longer mine to follow. What I had was here. Zachary walked over, setting down the paint roller, his shirt flecked with green. "You okay?" he asked, brushing a strand of hair from my cheek. I smiled, placing my hand over his. More than okay. We sat together in the center of the room, imagining what this space would sound like in a few short months. Laughter, tiny footsteps, midnight feedings, and maybe, someday, the kinds of stories we'd pass down, not the ones built on pain, but the ones forged in resilience, kindness, and choosing better. I would teach our child that endings are not always tragedies. Sometimes they're the turning point that brings you home to yourself. I had lost everything I thought I needed, and in return, I had been given everything I never knew to ask for. Not despite the betrayal, but because of it, because it forced me to choose myself. And from that choice, a life unfolded, not loud, not showy, but deeply, unapologetically mine.